The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient cobblestones of Windsor Castle, as tourists from around the world gathered to witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Marcus Hendricks, a 42-year-old businessman from Dallas, Texas. He wore expensive designer sunglasses, a polo shirt with the collar popped up, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that often bordered on arrogance. Marcus had arrived in London 3 days earlier, for what he called a quick European vacation between business deals. He had spent most of his time complaining about the weather, the food, and what he considered the outdated traditions of British culture. His wife Sandra had stopped trying to reason with him after the first day. She walked a few steps behind, embarrassed by his constant, loud commentary about everything they encountered. "I don't understand why people make such a big deal about guys standing still in funny hats," Marcus announced to no one in particular, his Texas drawl cutting through the respectful silence of the other tourists. Several people turned to look at him with disapproval, but he either didn't notice or didn't care. He pulled out his phone and began recording a video for his social media followers. "Hey everyone, Marcus here from jolly old England," he said into his phone camera, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "About to see some dudes in red coats pretend to be soldiers? This is what passes for entertainment over here." Sandra touched his arm gently, trying to get him to lower his voice, but he shrugged her off. The Royal Guard stood at their posts with remarkable stillness. These were not actors or performers, as Marcus seemed to believe, but highly trained soldiers from elite regiments who had earned the honor of guarding the royal residences. Each guard had undergone rigorous training and served with distinction. The young man standing nearest to Marcus was Guardsman James Morrison, 24 years old, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before being selected for ceremonial duties. Marcus approached the barrier that separated tourists from the guards. He held a large cup of expensive coffee he had purchased from a nearby cafe, still recording with his other hand. "Look at this guy," he said into his phone. "Probably been standing there for hours. Bet he'd love some of this coffee." He laughed at his own joke, completely unaware of the serious breach of protocol and respect he was about to commit. "Marcus, please," Sandra whispered urgently. "Let's just watch quietly like everyone else." "Relax, honey. I'm just having a little fun," he replied, waving her off. "These guards are famous for not reacting to anything, right? Let's test that theory." Other tourists began to move away from Marcus, sensing that something inappropriate was about to happen. A Japanese family quickly gathered their children and stepped to the side. An elderly British couple shook their heads in disgust. Everyone could feel the tension building, but Marcus seemed oblivious to it all. He stepped closer to the barrier, holding his coffee cup up toward Guardsman Morrison. "Hey buddy, you want a sip? You look like you could use some caffeine to help you stay awake during your very important job of standing still." His voice was loud enough that it echoed off the castle walls. Several people in the crowd gasped. Guardsman Morrison remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed forward, his expression unchanged. He had been trained to ignore distractions, but this wasn't just a distraction. This was disrespect toward the uniform, the regiment, and the crown itself. Inside, James felt his jaw tighten slightly, but outwardly he remained the picture of military discipline. Marcus, emboldened by the lack of reaction, decided to escalate. "Come on, just one little sip. It's a vanilla latte, very trendy. Oh wait, you probably only drink tea over here, right?" He laughed again, looking around at the crowd as if expecting them to join in. Instead, he was met with cold stares and uncomfortable silence. A security officer began moving toward Marcus, recognizing that the situation needed to be controlled. But before he could reach him, Marcus made his biggest mistake. He pretended to stumble slightly, causing a few drops of his hot coffee to splash toward the guard's impeccable uniform. The drops landed on the polished boots that Guardsman Morrison had spent an hour preparing that morning. The crowd's collective gasp was audible. Sandra covered her face with her hands, mortified. Marcus, however, seemed pleased with himself. "Oops, my bad," he said with a smirk, not sounding sorry at all. He raised his phone higher to capture the guard's reaction, certain he was creating viral content for his social media. "What? Marcus didn't understand was that he had just crossed a line that went far beyond tourist misbehavior. The guards at royal residences have the authority to address threats and disruptions. More importantly, there were protocols in place for dealing with individuals who interfered with their duties. The cameras positioned around the castle had captured everything, and security personnel were already in motion. Guardsman Morrison still did not move. His training had prepared him for far worse than an arrogant tourist with coffee. He had faced enemy fire in combat zones, had seen friends wounded in battle, and had earned multiple commendations for bravery under pressure. This man waving a coffee cup was nothing more than a minor annoyance. It's hardly worth breaking his ceremonial stance. But the guard's calm response didn't mean there would be no consequences. In fact, the wheels of justice were already beginning to turn, though Marcus remained blissfully unaware. He continued filming, narrating his funny encounter with the uptight British guard for his followers back home, completely missing the security officers now approaching from multiple directions and the changed expressions of everyone around him. The security officers moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, their radios crackling with quiet communications. Marcus was still holding his phone up, recording what he thought would be his moment of viral fame. He didn't notice the two uniformed officers approaching from his left until one of them spoke directly to him. "I'm going to need you to lower your phone and step away from the barrier," the officer said firmly, but politely. His name tag read Officer Davis, and his expression showed no amusement whatsoever. Marcus turned toward him with an annoyed expression. "Excuse me? I'm just taking pictures like everyone else here. This is a public space, isn't it?" "Sir, you've just assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Guard," Officer Davis replied, his voice remaining calm but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. "That's a serious offense. I need you to come with me now." "Assaulted?" Marcus laughed incredulously. "I spilled a little coffee. Accidentally. It's not that serious. Why don't you guys lighten up a bit?" He looked around at the crowd, expecting support, but found only hostile stares and people recording the confrontation on their own phones. The second officer, a woman named Officer Thompson, stepped forward. "Sir, we have the entire incident on camera. You deliberately splashed coffee on a guard's uniform while mocking him. You also crossed the security barrier, which is clearly marked. We need you to cooperate and come with us to answer some questions." Sandra finally found her voice. "Marcus, please just do what they say. You've caused enough trouble." Her face was red with embarrassment, and tears were starting to form in her eyes. "This is ridiculous," Marcus protested, but his confidence was beginning to waver. He could see more security personnel gathering, and the crowd had grown larger, all of them watching him with disapproval. "Fine, whatever. Let's get this over with. I'm sure once I explain that it was just a joke, this whole thing will blow over." Officer Davis took Marcus's phone as evidence, which prompted another outburst. "Hey, you can't take that. I have important business contacts on there. You'll get it back after we review the footage, sir. Now please, come with us." The officers guided Marcus toward a security office within the castle grounds. Sandra followed behind, apologizing quietly to the people they passed as they walked away. Guardsman Morrison finally allowed himself the smallest of reactions. His eyes, which had remained fixed straight ahead throughout the entire encounter, flickered briefly toward his superior officer who had approached to check on him. The officer inspected the coffee stains on Morrison's boots and uniform. "You maintained excellent composure, Morrison," the officer said quietly. "Get yourself cleaned up and file a report. We'll handle this through the proper channels." "Thank you, sir," Morrison replied crisply. Inside, he felt a mixture of professional pride and quiet satisfaction. He had not given that arrogant tourist the reaction he wanted. He had maintained the honor of his regiment and shown the watching crowd what true discipline looked like. Meanwhile, in the security office, Marcus was being shown the full extent of his mistake. The head of castle security, Commander Williams, a stern man in his 50s with decades of experience, sat across from him at a plain table. Sandra sat beside Marcus, looking miserable. "Mr. Hendricks," Commander Williams began, opening a folder. "Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done today? Look, I already explained to your officers. It was just a joke. A bit of fun? The guy's fine, isn't he? Marcus replied. Though his voice had lost most of its earlier bravado, Commander Williams turned a computer monitor toward Marcus. Let me show you something. He played back the security footage, which showed Marcus's actions from multiple angles in crystal clear detail. There was no denying what the cameras had captured. Marcus's deliberate movement toward the guard, his mocking words, and the intentional splash of coffee were all clearly visible. That doesn't look like an accident to me. Mr. Hendricks, Commander Williams said. It looks like deliberate harassment of a soldier on duty. It also shows you crossing a security barrier that exists for everyone's safety. Marcus's face paled slightly. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that you could be charged with several offenses. Assault of a serviceman, breach of security protocols, and disturbing the peace. For starters, these aren't minor infractions. They carry real consequences, including possible detention and a substantial fine. Sandra gasped. Detention? Like jail? That would be up to the courts to decide, ma'am. What happens next depends largely on Mr. Hendricks's attitude and willingness to take responsibility for his actions. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but Sandra cut him off. He's sorry. We're both very sorry. Marcus, apologize right now. For the first time since arriving in London, Marcus seemed to grasp the gravity of his situation. His usual confidence crumbled. I didn't think it was that big a deal. I didn't mean any real harm. Ignorance isn't an excuse, Mr. Hendricks, Commander Williams replied. That young man you mocked is a decorated soldier who served his country in combat. The uniform he wears represents centuries of military tradition and current service. Your actions showed profound disrespect not just to him, but to everything he represents. Marcus sat in silence, finally understanding that his harmless fun had serious implications. The reality of his situation was beginning to sink in, and with it came the first genuine feelings of regret. Commander Williams leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus carefully. The brash American businessman who had walked in 20 minutes ago was now quiet and pale. The reality of his situation finally settling in, Sandra sat beside her husband, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her earlier embarrassment now mixed with genuine worry. Here's what's going to happen, Commander Williams said, his tone professional but slightly less stern. I've reviewed the footage and consulted with Guardsman Morrison. He's choosing not to press personal charges, which is generous considering the circumstances. However, that doesn't mean you're off the hook entirely. Marcus looked up with a glimmer of hope. So I can go? Not quite, the commander continued. You've still violated castle security protocols and disturbed a ceremonial duty. There will be an official fine of £1,500 for the security breach alone. Additionally, you're now banned from all royal residences and properties for the next 5 years. This includes Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Kensington Palace, and all other protected sites. £1,500? Marcus's voice cracked. That's over $2,000. Consider yourself fortunate. If Guardsman Morrison had chosen to press charges for assault, you'd be looking at criminal proceedings that could have landed you in a British jail and cost you tens of thousands in legal fees. Not to mention the impact on your ability to travel internationally in the future. Commander Williams slid a document across the table. You'll sign this acknowledgement of the ban and the fine. You have 24 hours to pay. Sandra touched Marcus's arm. Just sign it, Marcus. Please. With shaking hands, Marcus signed the document. His signature, usually bold and confident, looked small and uncertain on the paper. One more thing, Commander Williams added, pulling out Marcus's phone. The video you recorded has been reviewed. Under our security protocols, we're required to delete any unauthorized close-up footage of security procedures and guard positions. However, the portion showing your own behavior has been preserved as evidence. I strongly suggest you don't attempt to recreate or post about this incident on social media. Any attempt to mock or defame the guard could result in legal action for slander. Marcus nodded silently. Accepting his phone back, like a chastened child receiving a confiscated toy, you're free to go, But I suggest you spend the remainder of your time in the United Kingdom reflecting on respect and cultural sensitivity. Good day, Mr. Hendricks. As Marcus and Sandra left the security office, they emerged into bright sunlight that felt harsh and accusing. The crowd at the castle had changed, but news of the incident had spread. Several people recognized them and whispered to each other, pointing discreetly. Sandra hurried toward the exit, desperate to escape the attention. Outside the castle gates, they found a bench and sat in heavy silence. Marcus stared at his hands, his earlier swagger completely gone. $2,000, he muttered, and banned for 5 years, all because of a stupid joke. It wasn't a joke, Marcus, Sandra said quietly, her voice tight with emotion. It was mean and disrespectful. I've been embarrassed by your behavior this entire trip, but today you crossed a line. That young man was just doing his job, and you treated him like he was beneath you. I didn't think that's the problem. You never think about how your actions affect other people. Sandra's voice broke. Do you know what I heard while we were in that security office? One of the officers mentioned that guard, James Morrison, served in Afghanistan. He's a real soldier who's seen real combat, and you mocked him like he was some kind of street performer. Marcus felt a wave of shame wash over him. For the first time, he truly considered the person behind that stoic uniform. A young man who had served his country, faced dangers Marcus couldn't imagine, and earned the honor of ceremonial duty, only to be disrespected by an arrogant tourist. Marcus said quietly. You can't, Sandra replied. You're banned, remember? And even if you could, what would you say? How do you apologize for that kind of disrespect? They sat in silence for several minutes, watching tourists come and go. Excited and respectful visitors who appreciated the history and tradition they were witnessing. Everything Marcus should have been. What are we going to tell people back home? Sandra asked finally. Marcus hadn't even thought about that. His social media followers, his business associates, his friends who would have seen the posts he had planned to make about his hilarious encounter with the British Guard. But now, there was no viral video, no funny story, just an expensive lesson in humility and a 5-year ban from some of the world's most famous landmarks. We tell them the truth, Marcus said slowly, the words feeling strange in his mouth. We tell them I was a disrespectful fool who learned a hard lesson about treating people with dignity. Sandra looked at her husband in surprise. It was perhaps the first truly humble thing she had heard him say in years, as they walked back toward their hotel through the streets of Windsor. Marcus noticed things he had ignored before. The pride on the faces of British families, pointing out landmarks to their children. The quiet respect tourists showed at historical sites. The way people queued patiently and spoke politely to service workers. He had come to England thinking he was superior, that his American confidence and money made him better than the outdated traditions he saw around him. But the calm, dignified response of Guardsman Morrison and the swift justice of the security team had shown him something important. Real strength isn't about being loud or dominant. It's about discipline, respect, and doing your duty with honor, even when others try to tear you down. The remainder of Marcus and Sandra's trip passed in a subdued atmosphere that was drastically different from the first few days. Marcus had paid the £1,500 fine that afternoon, watching a significant chunk of his vacation budget disappear with a few clicks on his banking app. The transaction felt like more than just a financial penalty. It was a tangible reminder of his poor judgment. That evening, back in their hotel room, Marcus sat at the small desk while Sandra unpacked their day bag. He opened his laptop and stared at his social media accounts. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he couldn't bring himself to type anything. The sarcastic, boastful posts he had planned about teaching those stuffy Brits a lesson now seemed pathetic and cruel. Instead, he found himself searching for information about the Royal Guards. What he discovered made his shame deepen. These weren't just ceremonial figures in fancy uniforms. The guards came from active infantry regiments like the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, and Scots Guards. They were combat soldiers who had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other conflict zones. The ceremonial duties were a prestigious assignment earned through exemplary service. He found an article about the training required to become a Queen's Guard. The selection process was rigorous. demanding both military excellence and the ability to maintain composure under extreme conditions. Guards stood for hours in all weather conditions, enduring physical discomfort and public attention without breaking their discipline. It was a test of mental fortitude that Marcus now realized he could never pass. "Sandra," he called out quietly, "come look at this." She approached and read over his shoulder. The article showed photos of guards in various situations, standing stoically during rainstorms, maintaining their posts in summer heat, and even serving in combat zones in their primary military roles. One photo showed a young guardsman receiving a medal for bravery in Afghanistan. "That could be him," Marcus said softly. "That could be the man I mocked today." "Probably," Sandra replied, her voice neutral but not unkind. Marcus closed the laptop and rubbed his face with his hands. "I've been such an idiot. Not just today, but this whole trip. Complaining about everything, acting superior, treating people like they exist for my entertainment." "Yes, you have," Sandra agreed, sitting on the bed. "But at least you're finally seeing it." "What made me like this?" Marcus asked, more to himself than to his wife. "When did I become the kind of person who thinks it's funny to humiliate someone just doing their job?" Sandra considered the question carefully. "I think success went to your head. Your business has done well, and somewhere along the way, you started measuring your worth by how much money you make and how much control you have. You forgot that wealth and power don't make you better than anyone else." Oh, Marcus knew she was right. His real estate company in Dallas had grown rapidly over the past decade. He had gone from struggling to pay bills to owning multiple properties and employing dozens of people. The success had fed his ego, making him believe that his way of doing things was the only right way. Anyone different, anyone who valued tradition or ceremony over profit and efficiency, seemed foolish to him. But Guardsman Morrison's calm, dignified silence in the face of Marcus's mockery had shaken that worldview. The young soldier hadn't needed to argue or defend himself. His discipline and professionalism spoke louder than any words could have. He had demonstrated a kind of strength that Marcus's loud, an aggressive approach could never match. The next morning, Marcus suggested they spend the day visiting museums and historical sites, approaching them with genuine respect and interest rather than cynical mockery. They visited the British Museum, where Marcus found himself genuinely moved by the ancient artifacts and the stories they told. At the Imperial War Museum, he stood silently before exhibits, honoring soldiers who had given their lives in service. And he thought again about the guard he had disrespected in the evening. They had dinner at a small pub in Covent Garden. The server was a young woman named Emma, who was friendly and efficient despite the busy restaurant. When she brought their meals, Marcus made sure to thank her genuinely and left a generous tip, not to show off, but as a sincere gesture of appreciation for her work. "That was nice of you, Sandra," commented after Emma had cleared their plates. "Dealing with people all day, probably dealing with rude customers regularly," Marcus said. "The least I can do is treat her with respect." Sandra reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm seeing a different person than the one who arrived in London 4 days ago." "I'm trying," Marcus admitted. "I don't like who I was at that castle. I don't want to be that person anymore." On their final day in London, Marcus did something unexpected. He went to a high-end stationery store and purchased quality writing paper in an envelope. Back at the hotel, he sat down and wrote a letter. His handwriting was careful and deliberate. "Dear Guardsman Morrison," he wrote, "you don't know me, but I am the American tourist who disrespected you at Windsor Castle 2 days ago. I want to apologize for my behavior. There is no excuse for the way I mocked you in your service. I have since learned about the sacrifices you and your fellow guards have made in service to your country, and I am deeply ashamed of my actions. You maintained your dignity and professionalism while I acted like a fool. I hope that someday I can demonstrate even a fraction of the discipline and honor you showed that day. With sincere regret and respect, Marcus Hendricks." He addressed the envelope to Guardsman James Morrison in care of Windsor Castle and included it with the hotel's outgoing mail, uncertain if it would ever reach its intended recipient, but hoping it might. 3 months after returning to Dallas, Marcus sat in his office overlooking the downtown skyline. The incident at Windsor Castle had changed him in ways he was still discovering. His employees had noticed the difference immediately. The man who had left for London had been demanding and often dismissive. The man who returned listened more and spoke less, treated everyone with genuine respect, regardless of their position. His assistant, Maria, had worked for him for 5 years and weathered countless instances of his arrogance. She had been shocked when he first apologized to her for his previous behavior and asked for her honest feedback about how he could be a better boss. Their working relationship had transformed from tense to collaborative. Today, Marcus was preparing for a presentation to potential investors. But his mind kept drifting back to that morning at Windsor Castle. The memory still brought a flush of embarrassment, but it also served as a reminder of the person he never wanted to be again. His phone buzzed with an email notification. He glanced at the screen and froze. The subject line read, "Response from Windsor Castle." With trembling hands, he opened the email. It was from the castle's public affairs office, and attached was a scanned letter on official letterhead. Marcus's heart pounded as he opened the attachment. "Dear Mr. Hendricks, your letter was received and passed along to me through the proper channels. I appreciate you taking the time to write and apologize. What happened that day was unfortunate, but I respect that you've reflected on your actions and found them wanting. You should know that I don't hold any personal grudge against you. Part of our training is understanding that we represent something larger than ourselves. When tourists interact with us, they're often responding to the uniform and what it represents, not to us as individuals. Some, like yourself on that day, see us as targets for mockery. Others see us as living symbols of tradition and service. The discipline we maintain isn't about being emotionless or superior. It's about duty, honor, and respect for the institution we serve. Your letter suggests you understand that now. I'm glad your experience led to positive change rather than just resentment. That's not always the case. Many people would have left England angry and defensive, blaming everyone but themselves. The fact that you chose a different path speaks to your character. I accept your apology. More importantly, I encourage you to take the lessons from that day and use them to treat everyone you encounter with the respect and dignity they deserve, regardless of their position or role. With respect, Guardsman James Morrison. Marcus read the letter 3 times, his eyes blurring with unexpected tears. The grace and maturity in Morrison's response was humbling. The young soldier could have ignored the apology or responded with justified anger. Instead, he had offered forgiveness and encouragement. Sandra found Marcus still sitting at his desk an hour later, the letter still open on his computer screen. "What's wrong?" she asked, concerned by the expression on his face. He wrote back, Marcus said simply, turning the screen toward her. "The guard." He accepted my apology. Sandra read the letter, her own eyes filling with tears. "Oh, Marcus. He's 24 years old," Marcus said quietly. "He's younger than some of my employees, and he has more wisdom and grace than I've shown in my entire life." That evening, Marcus printed out Morrison's letter and placed it in a frame on his office wall. When colleagues asked about it, he told them the full story, including his own shameful behavior. Some were surprised by his honesty. Most were impressed by his willingness to own his mistakes and learn from them. The letter became a conversation starter and a teaching tool. Marcus began sharing the story with his business associates, using it as an example of how arrogance and disrespect always come back to harm us. While humility and dignity elevate everyone, he established a new company policy, treating all people with respect. From the CEO to the cleaning crew was not just encouraged but required. He created an award in his company called the Morrison Award, given quarterly to employees who demonstrated exceptional professionalism and grace under pressure. 6 months after the incident, Marcus was invited to speak at a business conference about leadership and company culture. He stood before 200 people and told them about the worst moment of his life, the day he mocked a Royal Guard and learned that true strength comes from discipline and respect, not dominance and mockery. "I went to England thinking I was better than the people I encountered," he told the audience. "I saw their traditions as quaint and outdated. I saw their formality as weakness. I was completely wrong. That young guard, standing silent and dignified while I made a fool of myself, taught me more about leadership in 5 minutes than I had learned in 20 years of business." He showed them Morrison's letter on the screen behind him. This is what real character looks like. Not someone who gloats when they have power over others, but someone who shows grace and offers guidance, even to people who have wronged them. That's the kind of leader I aspire to be. The speech received a standing ovation, but the real impact came afterward. Marcus received dozens of emails from attendees sharing their own stories of arrogance, humbled, and lessons learned through embarrassment. His willingness to be vulnerable about his failures had given others permission to examine their own behavior. A year after the incident, Marcus and Sandra returned to London. He wasn't allowed at Windsor Castle because of the ban, but he didn't mind. Instead, they visited other historical sites with genuine appreciation and respect. They donated to charities supporting military veterans and attended a ceremony honoring British soldiers. On their last day, Marcus stood outside the gates of Windsor Castle, as close as he was allowed to be. He couldn't see the guards from that distance, but he stood there for several minutes in respectful silence, mentally thanking the young guardsman who had taught him such a valuable lesson. "Ready to go?" Sandra asked gently. "Yes," Marcus replied, taking her hand. "I think I finally am." As they walked away, Marcus thought about the journey from that humiliating morning to this moment of peace and growth. The coffee he had splashed on a guard's boots had been the catalyst for the most important transformation of his life. It had cost him money, pride, and privilege, but it had given him something far more valuable: the understanding that every person deserves respect, and that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in maintaining dignity and grace in all circumstances. The instant karma he had experienced that day at Windsor Castle wasn't just the fine and the ban. It was the mirror that had been held up to his behavior, forcing him to see himself as others saw him. And in that reflection, he had found not the successful, confident businessman he thought he was, but a small, insecure man who treated others poorly to feel important. He had learned his lesson, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to live up to the example set by a 24-year-old soldier who had shown him what real honor looked like.